Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of our virtual RVing rally. We have a great presentation this morning, which is a popular topic for many, and it's what we need to know if we're going to go RVing in Mexico. We're so pleased to have Marc and Natalie here with their Slow Sally crew RVing experience. They've traveled throughout Mexico and into Central America for I think over 6 years now, and they have a wealth of information experience to share with us. So we're really looking forward to all of the tips that they're going to share, as well as the question and answer period and discussion we'll have at the end of their presentation. So thank you so much, Marc and Natalie, for taking the time to prepare your presentation, and we look forward to hearing some really interesting experience and tips from you. So we'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
All right, thanks, Doug. Thanks for the invitation. We love talking about our travels, so and we appreciate that you put this, rally together. I guess I'll start by introducing who we are. I'm Marc, and this is Natalie, and we're known, as you said, as Slow Sally and Crew. We're Canadian. We live in Quebec, the French province, and we like to spend 4 to 6 months a year traveling in our road truck, our 1994 Dodge Versatile, and effectively we primarily try to get away from our Canadian winters for the most part. As much as Natalie likes winters, I do not. Personally, I'm a retired civil servant. I work for the Canadian government, and Natalie is a part-time urban planning consultant. So that's kind of our general background. And we travel with our dog, Walter, and he's, for the most part, unemployed. So, we do have a blog. So if anybody's interested in following us, I'm sure some of you already do. It's slowsallyandcrew.com. So that's a little plug on our side there.
Okay, so today we're going to do about half of the time for presentation and half of the time for discussion. I think we could have some really good discussion on some of the topics around traveling in Mexico, so we want to make sure we leave lots of time at the end. And the presentation is really going to be the top 7 questions that we typically get asked about traveling in Mexico, and the answers to those questions. And I think what we'll do, just because I feel like we could have a 1-hour session on any one of these questions. So I think for the most part, we'll try to hold the questions for the end and then just sort of have a discussion around all of those topics at the end. And just before we get started, we did put together this map just to give you guys an idea of some of the places we've traveled in Mexico. So each of those push pins represent a place we've visited at least once, and in a lot of cases, we've been in those places multiple times. And actually, my free map only gave me 30 push pins, so we have traveled a little more extensively than this. But this gives a pretty good, I'd say, representation of where we've been. And it is interesting, when I put this together, I noticed there's a big corner of the Northwest that we haven't covered, which gives me some ideas for this year. So we may try to put some push pins in that section of the map this year. Marc, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, so the number one question, of course, we get is why we travel in Mexico. Why do we go there? And effectively, it's a hard question to answer so easily. There's so many variables at play that just appeal to us. And effectively, we like to get out of our comfort zone. It's just a very different world, a different culture than we're used to. So, we like to challenge, and we like, getting into the culture. Effectively, it's a very sensory kind of thing. It feels like you're going, from black and white to color sometimes. It just, everything is so different. It's a sensory thing, and it affects everything. From the food, which is wonderful. Like, I love the food in Mexico, and it's varied, and it's they use a lot of fresh ingredients all the time because it's available. And then there's the historic towns and the architecture and the villages, and they're so vibrant and different, and effectively, you know, you can literally spend years going from place to place and discovering, you know, these places. And you know, if you look on some of the photos here, you know, those are, I think those are fish tacos at the top, maybe, and you know, I love fish tacos. On the bottom you see Walter in a little town called La Peña de Bernal, which is a monolith town, and a lot of people go there because of that view of that big mountain. And then you've got, you know, cities like Guanajuato, which is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever visited. It's colonial, and effectively it's just vibrant. And all within those things you have, you know, like the Mayan culture, and some of the older, if you're into history, you've got, you know, the pyramids and ruins, and there are just so many things to see and do and experience. So that's basically, if I can answer it quickly, and I know that's not that quick, that's how I would answer that question. Next slide.
So another aspect of why we like to go traveling in Mexico is that there's really a wide variety of climates and geographies. So a lot of people, when they think of Mexico, just think of like hot beaches, maybe some cacti. But the reality is there's really a little bit of something for everyone in Mexico. So there's everything from, you know, hot, dry deserts. You've got cool, high elevation mountain ranges, waterfalls. You see in one of those pictures a beautiful blue lake district. So there's some lake districts. There is, of course, the beaches, if you do like the beaches. And there's also jungles full of different kinds of species and howler monkeys and Mayan ruins. And so it's really, for us, we actually don't love spending a huge amount of time in really hot beach areas. So we spend a lot of our time in the middle of the country where there's a lot of mountains and cooler temperatures. So it's just very diverse.
Okay, that is my slide. So, so another reason is, like, when we travel, you know, we tend to try and meet people, and the further in you go into Mexico, you know, there's so many ways to travel Mexico. You can hang into the more touristy areas, or you can really get off the beaten path, and there are different experiences, and it really, you should do both. But generally, Mexicans tend to be very, very kind and friendly and curious. Which is very different than some of our travels more in Central America, where if you walk into a town and you're not used to tourists, they kind of stare at you like, "Oh, who are you? What do you want?" But in Mexico, they're outwardly more friendly. They're more used to tourists. But since it's a big country, they're not as intimidated by tourists. So they'll come up to you and you know, chat you up. And the fact that we have Walter too. Traveling with a northern dog is very, I guess, different for them, and they're always asking, you know, what's his name, how big is he, how much does he weigh? So that's a great way to, you know, interact with people. And then at the same time, you have, you know, you run into other local, not local, but, you know, travelers, similar travelers traveling across Mexico, and that's another great way to meet people as well.
So, and I would guess the final, actually it's not the final reason, but final of our top 4 is the lower cost of travel. So for us, we find that traveling in Mexico, a lot of the costs for things are 1/3 to half the price of what they would be in Canada and the US. And what that means for us when we're away for a long time in the winter is we can travel for longer periods, and we also can enjoy more luxuries than we would if we stayed in Canada or the US. So, you know, eating out's really cheap, so it means we eat out at restaurants quite a bit.
Or street food.
Yeah, like lots of street food. Yeah, there's lots of, I mean, if you want to go to a festival, even things like camping and campgrounds is very affordable. So whereas we might in Canada just spend 1 night a week in a campground, in Mexico, we'll often spend more time in campgrounds. And so it's just, it's definitely a more economical way of traveling.
Yeah, and we like to save $1 here and there, so that's really important to us.
We're frugal.
Yeah.
Number 2, is it safe to travel in Mexico? So this is a question that we get all the time. And if you see the slide there, it says, "Don't go there, it's not safe, you'll die." and other more rational advice for overlanding in Mexico and Central America. So this is a great book. It's one that we read before we went to Mexico the first time with our, we were in a car at the time actually. And we were really told that by a lot of people back home and as we traveled through the US that, you know, we were definitely going to die if we drove into Mexico. But, you know, based on our experience and the experience of so many other travelers we've met in Mexico, the answer is yes, it is safe to travel in Mexico. And so a few of the things I'll address is one is violent crime. So there definitely is a violent crime issue in Mexico, but a lot of it is around cartel violence and some other, you know, sort of politically motivated violence. It's really more of a concern, in our opinion, for Mexican nationals. As a tourist who's traveling through Mexico during tourist activities, the chances of being the victim of violent crime is very unlikely, and you'd have to be very unlucky. And you know, there's never any guarantees, obviously, but it's not something that's common. And we've certainly never experienced anything close to violent crime. Petty theft is another thing that people worry about. I would say in our experience, it is something that's a little bit more of a concern in Mexico compared with traveling in Canada and the US. So in our experience, if you're traveling outside of like a very controlled RV park, definitely lock up your stuff. Things you might not normally worry about, like sandals or t-shirts or an old bike that you might just leave out by your RV, or camp chairs. Those are things you should definitely lock up.
We lost some camp chairs.
Yeah, we did lose some camp chairs. It's something you want to lock up when you're in Mexico. And we really avoid leaving valuables in the RV, again, unless it's in like a very tightly controlled RV park. So we'll actually carry our valuables on us. Like if we've got our laptop or our iPad, we'll carry that on us because we typically feel very safe walking around in Mexico. That's not a concern that we have. But the concern would be potentially a break into the RV. So what we do to avoid those concerns is if we are parking in a city, we'll often park just in a paid parking lot. They often have a little security attendant. It's not expensive. And that pretty much ensures that anything in your RV will be safe. And I guess the final thing I have labeled here is scams and corruption. And those aren't really safety concerns, but it is something that I think make people feel threatened potentially. So a few of the things to look out for if you are traveling in Mexico is there are a lot of little gas pump scams that are sort of infamous in Mexico, things like them not zeroing the pump, you know, switching bills and giving you wrong change. So it's just when you are at the gas pumps in Mexico, you definitely want to get out of your RV, keep an eye on what's going on, make sure the pump gets zeroed. Some gas stations are known for stealing credit card information, and some other companies as well. So we typically always just take out cash while we're there and pay for everything with cash, and that's how we avoid that. And then of course, everyone knows about police in Mexico taking bribes, which is another concern. So that's another one where it's not a safety issue, but you know, the best thing to do is to not give police a bribe if they're asking for it, and just insist that they bring you to the station and pay the appropriate fine if you have done something wrong. And usually the fines in Mexico are significantly cheaper than they would be in US or Canada. They'll often tell you that, you know, it's $100 US fine. If you just give me a bribe, we'll let you away, but they'll often inflate those prices, and the real fine prices are actually very reasonable if you are stuck having to pay one. And if you guys do have some questions about police bribes or scams, we can talk about that more in the discussion as well.
Yeah, and to be honest, they don't happen that often. We typically get pulled over maybe once a year, maybe even a little less now.
Yeah, on average.
On average, we were averaging once a year, and I'd say like we had 1 year recently that we didn't have any. So it's like once a year, and effectively, you know, you have two choices. You negotiate yourself down to a reasonable amount and get out of it, or you go to the police station and pay there. But you know, it's a bit of a game, and you have to play it differently every time. So it's more now at this point an annoyance than anything else, and it's something that it's just the cost of travel. You know, you either pay in your time or in your dollars. So it's really about minimizing those two. Okay, so the next question that we get is like, what are the campgrounds like, and are they easy to find? Campgrounds are generally, cheaper, and they're typically lower service and often more informal. They do have your typical RV park style American Canadian formats in Mexico, but there's not many. And that's what makes it a little more challenging for people who are traveling, who need, let's say, to dump on a regular basis. If you have a black tank and you need to dump, well, now you're going to only be traveling to those kind of places, and there's not many of them. But you can do it, but it is very limiting. So we've used all of them, and for different purposes. Sometimes it's geography, sometimes we need the services. So effectively, there's a big variety. Some of them are very informal, like a national park will let you park next to their building. You can see that in that photo at the top there. We're right at the visitors information, and that's where we slept. The bottom one is actually an RV park. And we've, camped in more right on the beach sometimes, and where there's no fees. But generally, we tend to go to, campgrounds that have fees because they're so cheap. Basically, you're looking at, a quarter to a third of the regular price back home, unless you're, well, even the more formal RV parks. I think you might pay $25. A night there. So effectively, it's so affordable that you kind of makes more sense to take them on as opposed to boondocking on the street, particularly if you're more concerned about losing your sandals and your t-shirt, right? So the other thing in terms is how do we find these places? So we use a number of different approaches, and iOverlander is a big one. iOverlander works quite well in Mexico. We also Google things, so Google campgrounds in whatever city in Mexico, and that works as well. And because we're always chatting up other travelers, they'll tell us about places, and it's like, hey, that sounds like a great place, and we've done that many times, and that's worked out really well as well.
Yeah, and I would add that in terms of RV parks, like in some of the more, I'd say in Baja and some of the more touristy areas, there are actually a lot of RV parks now. But if you're traveling through the center of Mexico in some of the places that are not as touristy, it's definitely hard to find RV parks. So I think anyone with any RV can travel through Mexico, but depending on how many services you need, it just means I think that you need to do a little bit more research than you would traveling around in Canada, the US, to make sure that if you are going to need to dump your tanks, you make sure that you're going to be in an area that has an RV park where you can do that. Because we have run into people actually on a number of occasions, especially in northern Mexico, where they got stuck with full tanks and nowhere to dump them. So it's just something to make sure you do your research if you do need those services. And
just to note, we actually have a composting toilet, so we avoid all that. Now, we won't get into the whole composting, issue, because some people don't like composting toilets, but effectively it does allow us to move throughout Mexico unhindered from having to find dump stations.
So another question we get often asked is it difficult to cross the border? In our opinion, it's definitely more difficult to cross the border than it is crossing the Canada-US border. And I'd say that's for two reasons. One is that a lot of borders, it's mostly Spanish that's spoken. So if you don't speak Spanish, it's definitely a lot more complicated because there's a lot of, using translation apps or sign language, or, it's definitely more difficult. And the other reason is that basically when you cross the Mexico border, there's essentially two steps. So the first is sort of that initial, no different than when you're crossing into the US, you've got sort of the big banner overhead and you pull in and someone chats with you through the window, asks you some question, maybe takes a look at your van. And normally you sort of feel like you're done. And actually a lot of people do take off from there and just drive into Mexico. But there's a second step when you're going into Mexico, which is basically either a very nearby building or a building, sometimes they're even a couple of kilometers away. You have to go to that building, find a place to park, and that's where you do the paperwork. And so when you get out at this building, you have to go in, you have to get your passport stamped, you have to get a tourist visa, and they'll stamp that and you pay for that there. And you'll also have to get a sticker where you're basically sort of, they call it importing your van. You're not really importing it, but you basically have to pay a fee and put a deposit down to bring your van in, and you'll get the deposit back when you leave. Right? So that's a whole second level of paperwork that I feel like we just don't worry about when we're crossing the Canada-US border. So it's more difficult, but that being said, it's definitely doable. It's just making sure that you do a bit of research in advance, know what's required, and bring the documents you need to bring with you. So in terms of what you need your passports. You need, if you're Canadian, you'll need your vehicle registration. If you're American, you'll need the title for your vehicle. Every vehicle entering Mexico, you need Mexican auto insurance. That's something you can purchase online. It's a whole discussion in itself, but you do have to have that before entering. And whoever owns the vehicle also needs to have their driver's license with them and be able to show that when you're crossing the border. And then, of course, if you do have pets you're bringing across, you'll need to have the proof of vaccine for your pets. Another thing is when they're doing the paperwork, they often want copies. So we find it's really helpful to bring copies of all of our paperwork with us. And that way, when we're doing the paperwork, instead of having to run around in the building in Mexico trying to get photocopies done, you can just hand them your already ready photocopied documents. So, you know, I know just having said that, it sounds like a lot. But it's not complicated, very doable. And I think the key thing is just do your research, make sure you know what you need, and make sure you've got your documents.
And we did actually cross the first time thinking we were going to die and, you know, not speaking a lot of Spanish, almost very little. And we muddled through it. And it wasn't, you know, after it was like, oh, that's not so bad. We thought it was going to be a lot worse and we weren't dead. So it was a good day.
Mm-hmm.
So question 5 is, you know, what is it like to drive in Mexico? And that is a very varied question as well. And, you know, you get all kinds of different experiences while driving. Driving in Mexico is not terribly difficult, but you have to understand what the nuances are. There's, you know, generally when you're traveling from one city to another, there's usually 2 types of roads. There's toll roads, which are the nice bigger highways. You know, you pay a toll and you're on it, and it's beautiful conditions. It's kind of like the highways you're used to back home. Then you've got the free highways, or the libres, and effectively those are the older regional roads that used to do the same thing until they built the big highways, but they still exist, and the locals use those. And they tend to be more, they drive into the little towns and they're slower and the roads are worse, but they're kind of more pretty. And if you want to see the sights, that's a good way to look at, you know, getting more immersed in it. I like the toll roads because they're faster and easier. Natalie likes the libres because it's more interesting. So it kind of depends on what you like. The toll roads, you know, aren't terribly expensive, but, you know, if you're going to be there for a long time and do a big tour, they'll add up eventually, like, you know, possibly to a couple of $100, but effectively on a day-to-day kind of situation, it's not so bad. So those are the 2 main ways to get around. In the cities, again, they're varied. Some are colonial, they have cobblestone, they can be very tight. They were built at a time when people had horses and not cars. So that's one of the advantages to having a road trek, is that, you know, we can get into almost any little town, get right into those areas, and compared to like big RVs who basically have to park out of the towns and either walk in or cab in. So we really like the road trek from that perspective. The other thing in Mexico you have to worry about is like animals. Like, you know, you've got cows and goats and chickens and dogs, and they're all over the place. And when you're driving around, you have to be always aware of what's crossing the road. And that's why you don't typically drive at night, because you do not want to hit a cow at night. And it does happen for those, you know, the Mexican nationals tend to drive all the time. but they're more used to it. And for us, we do not want to hit a cow. Now, the other thing that people need to be aware of is like Mexico tends to use topes, which are speed bumps. Like in some places, it's like crazy amount of, like we've literally passed over thousands of speed bumps, and it means being aware where they are because they're not always well marked. When you're coming up fast, eventually you will hit one too fast, and we've had things fly in the back, and the dog taking air kind of thing, water spilling everywhere. So it is their way to control speed. It works for them. It's not something we like, but we got used to them. Yeah, it's just the way it is. And the other thing is, like, some roads are in good shape, some roads are not. There's giant potholes. Sometimes part of the road is missing. It's very similar to the way we have it back in Quebec, actually. But that's another story.
All right. And so another question, do you need to speak Spanish? The answer is no. And the first time we drove down into Mexico, we spoke very little Spanish, and we managed to muddle our way through with sign language and a few basic words and phrases. Certainly, if you do speak Spanish, the more you speak, the easier it'll be. The more, the easier it'll be to cross the border, the easier it will be to, get directions from people, to find things, to register at campgrounds. Everything gets easier the more Spanish you speak, but don't let it hold you back if you don't speak Spanish, because you absolutely don't need to speak it to get around in Mexico. Certainly in the touristy areas, a lot of the people working there will speak some English. Less touristy areas, maybe not, but again, you can get by. And so what we would recommend is, it's always good to know at least a few basic words and phrases if you're going to go to Mexico. So we'd recommend learning, just things like, where's the washroom, where's the campground, how much is this, where can I find this or that, just some, where do I get a beer, all these more important questions. And so,
or a taco.
Or tacos, yeah. So some basic language helps. And there's also so many good translation apps now. So download a good translation app on your phone, something that can work offline. And that way, if you're talking to a vendor or trying to get directions from someone on the street, you can actually use that to talk back and forth a little bit. And that can really help you get out of a jam. You'll see that one of the photos that we have here is the Duolingo owl. So Duolingo is a language app. We really enjoy it, and it's great for learning some basic Spanish words and phrases. And it's kind of fun, like it's sort of like a quiz style. So that's something that's really helpful if you are going to be learning a bit of Spanish. And the other photo that we have down there is just us chatting with a vendor, purchasing some candy in the little town of Matuela. And so definitely, we've been going to Mexico, I think, for 6 years or so. Our Spanish has definitely improved. And so now we are at a level where we can chat a little bit with locals, and have some little conversations in Spanish.
I'd say we're upper beginners still.
Yeah, upper beginners.
We're always trying to brush up before we leave, but we should really spend more time when we're away back home learning it. But, life gets in the way. Okay, so the next question is, how much does it cost? The simple answer is a lot less, and that's kind of a nice appeal to traveling in certain countries. Certainly, as Natalie mentioned, getting into the through the border, there's some costs associated to that. There's $30 US per person for the tourist visa. There's a vehicle import cost to $50, and they ask you to put a deposit down too. That's just to ensure that you leave with your vehicle, because they don't want you to come in, sell your vehicle. They don't want that kind of activity going on. So effectively, they want you to come back with your vehicle, so to get your deposit back. You can also, for us, because we go there more often, we have a 10-year RV. Is it what do you call it? A tip.
Yeah, it's basically like an import sticker.
An import sticker. So because you're an RV, you are allowed to get this pass basically, and it means you can go through the border and not pay the $50 every year or the deposit, which is nice. But if you're going one time, it's probably not worth it. But if you're going to do it regularly like we do, that's what we have done, and it makes crossing the border a lot easier. As it relates to camping and living in Mexico, everything tends to be, as we mentioned earlier, probably a third to half the cost of back in the US and Canada. Certainly in touristy areas, it tends to be more expensive. And the more you get into the, the countryside, it gets a lot cheaper. So, those things are from our perspective, makes things, 3 times more affordable, basically. On the vehicle side, gas prices tend to be similar, sometimes more expensive. Vehicle parts tend to be similar or sometimes more expensive, depending on where they're coming, if they have to be imported to Mexico or if they're made in Mexico. Mechanics tend to be very inexpensive per labor. And you're looking at $12 US an hour or something like that. And we regularly, often enough, get some stuff done in Mexico. We've had our shocks changed in Mexico and some other things done as well. And effectively, we've learned from our transmission situation that the Mexicans are very good with the basic stuff, but they're not so good on the transmissions and computers and electronics. So you really need to be aware of that. And certainly you need to be near a bigger city if you need those kind of services.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely some Mexican mechanics that are, very capable of working on a transmission or a computer or an engine or, but, as you're traveling through and there's a lot of, every little town has a mechanic on every corner, and most of those guys are great. But if you do have a bigger job, you definitely need to do more research and likely be closer to, a bigger city with more support and better access to parts. Okay, and so helpful resources. This is just, I'm not going to go through this here on the presentation, but we thought it would be good to sort of just bookmark this somewhere so that people could refer to it later. This is a list of basically resources that we've used in the past that we think are super helpful for traveling through Mexico. So some of it is RV specific or camping specific, and other things are just sort of more general Mexican travel information. But if you are thinking of going to Mexico, I'd say these resources are definitely ones that you'd want to consult. So that pretty much wraps up our presentation. I do have a list of the Q&A topics that we discussed here just now, and we're happy to take questions about anything that we talked about or any other questions people may have. I know we sort of limited the discussion mostly to Mexico, but we have traveled extensively in Guatemala as well. So if anyone has questions about, traveling in Guatemala and Central America, that's something we can discuss as well. So Doug, maybe I'll just hand this back to you to facilitate questions and answers. And do you want me to stop the share?
Yeah, I think it would be better than we can see you and or others who come on to ask their questions. So, wow, that's a great, well-coordinated list of questions and answers. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions from our participants. So, folks, just come on. If you feel bashful to come on in person, type it in the chat and I'll ask on your behalf. But otherwise, just turn your camera on and toggle your microphone with the space bar. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions.
Okay, I've got a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, very good. You mentioned under petty theft that you carry all your valuables. Now, you're talking about money, computers, iPads, phones. You carry all of that, and how do you do that? Could you expand a bit on that?
Sure, yeah. So I would say to start, we do travel fairly light generally. I know there's some people who may have like larger TVs or things that aren't necessarily portable. So obviously, some stuff, if it's not portable, you're going to have to leave in the RV. But typically what we do is each of us will carry a day pack just about anywhere if we're leaving the van. And so in that, we'll make sure that, we've got the laptop, iPad, phones. I'm not going to lie, it's a bit of something to carry. Like, we don't travel light when we're walking around. But yeah, we typically do have at the very least our phones, our iPad, our computer, our cash.
Yeah.
We do also have, some people have really well installed safes. We have a I would call it a secret hiding spot. So we won't tell you what it is, but we do have a spot that we do hide valuables that is, we feel like would be very unlikely to be found if someone did a quick smash and grab.
We've lost items in it
ourselves.
Not thinking,
yeah.
Because where did I put it? Is it here? Is it here? Why can't I find it? And it's like, oh, I put it in the secret hiding place.
It's such a good hiding space that we've lost things in it ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's basically what we do. We definitely feel, I mean, we're obviously careful where we're visiting and where we're walking around, but when we are walking around, we do feel very safe generally. So we don't worry about the fact that we're carrying stuff in our backpacks. I would say if you do have a lot of valuables in your vehicle, if you're in a good, you know, RV park that's, you know, sort of got some sort of, you know, it's fenced off or something, then you're probably okay. Alternatively, if you're parked in a big city, like let's say you're in, you know, Guanajuato or Oaxaca for a day, we would normally park in like a secure parking lot while we're walking around. And then you can also feel relatively comfortable that anything you leave in your van is safe. So that's usually the approach we take, but yeah, I don't know, Mark, if you...
Yeah, and the other thing is we tend to always do an evaluation of wherever we are. Mm-hmm. So if we park somewhere, it's like, okay, is my iPad safer in the van or with me, right? So because there's always a possibility anywhere in the world that somebody would decide to, like, you know, rob you on the street. Mm-hmm. So are your valuables more safe with you or in your van? So, like, you know, if we're in, like Natalie said, if we're in an RV park and there's security and there's gates, it's like, you know what, it's safer in the van. Mm-hmm. And we'll go out, walk into the city, and we know we're in the best situation possible. You know, it's always a probability game, but, you know, we play it to make sense, and, you know, we try and be smart about it. So, and that's worked very well for us.
Yeah, and we've never experienced a smash and grab in Mexico or in US or Canada for that matter either. I think it's a lower risk generally, but it is, you know, as we've traveled, we've definitely met people who have had stuff stolen out of their van. Now, we've met people who've had stuff stolen out of their van in Canada and the US as well. Yeah. But I think it is probably a little bit more common in Mexico. I mean, even if just for the reason that there's not nearly as many RVs in a lot of part of Mexico. So even just having an RV might make you a little bit more of a target, because you're obviously you're more traveling obvious with your stuff.
And, you know, there is the fact that, you know, they're in a lower socioeconomic class, you know, with poverty, you know, you have people who are more desperate, and, you know, you're looked upon as a potential target that sticks out more than most. So, but, you know, personally, our own experience is really, we lost some camp chairs because we had to go get our oil changed, and we didn't want to lose our great camping spot. So we left some stuff there, and they were old, but, you know, when we lost them and we were sitting on the cooler going, I miss my chairs.
Okay, we've got a question on the chat here about what you estimate your monthly budget would be to be traveling in Mexico, and ways that if someone was on a short budget, could they save money by staying one place longer and driving less? Well, I mean, that's an obvious answer is yes, you could save a lot of gas money if you're not going to drive so much, but I'm thinking they're wondering about a weekly campground fee versus 1 or 2 nights. And how much would you say you spend over a month?
So generally what we tell people is that when you travel, because you're saving a lot of money in Mexico for all kinds of different things, our monthly expense is not much different than our monthly expense when we're home. So because we're as much as we still have the house at home, and we have, you know, the regular things that we have at home, we're saving so much money in Mexico that it tends to wash out. So from our perspective, we travel on a fiscally neutral model, basically. So as for budgets, like, it's a kind of a personal thing. We tend to travel on the cheap because we like to stay within our monthly budget, and you know, it's like on the cheap from our perspective. We do spend almost all our times in campgrounds. We don't have to boondock. You know, we could, but, you know, we find there's more value in going into the informal campgrounds and RV parks. You know, most of those places, you know, cost anywhere from, I don't know, $6-7 to $25 US a night. You can negotiate, you can get weekly discounts, and if you want to stay longer, you can get really good monthly discounts. So, you know, it all depends on where you are and how long you stay. And, you know, I think staying in one place, you know, for road truckers and all RVers is one of those things. The more you move, the more it costs. The more you stay in one place, it definitely is cheaper. Like some people, and it depends on the individual. We like to move around and stay at places at the same time. Where Natalie likes to go everywhere, and I like to concentrate in one place. And so we end up doing something in between. But we've met people who will sit one place for 3 months, and we've met people who are there for a day or two and they move on to the next place. So
yeah, I mean, just to give an idea, I was just reading this morning someone who was renting an apartment in Mexico, and their living expense per month, I think, was anywhere from about $600 to $700 US per month, and that included the apartment, their food, and any of their other living expenses. So I would say, you know, if someone can do that in an apartment, certainly if you're in a van in a campground, and you're just looking at your budget for that month for being in Mexico, you could certainly do it within that budget, I would say. But yeah, a lot of it will depend on where you are, what type of campground you're in. And certainly for us, I think the biggest expense is moving around when we're in Mexico. It's the gas and the toll roads. So if you stay put, there's, you know, you could do it on a very small budget, I would say. But yeah, unfortunately, it's been a long time since we've kept track of our monthly budget to give an exact number.
Yeah, we used to count every penny, actually.
So if we were going to take away the budget or the cost, would you say you stay in campgrounds because you're more comfortable, you feel more safe? Like my travel would be more drive down a coastal road and you see a nice spot, pull off and camp there overnight facing the ocean. So we're big boondockers. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to be away for a month or 6 weeks. And I wouldn't ever be in a campground unless maybe I need water or to dump my black tank. So in terms of your preference for paid camping, is it, forgetting the budget, is it feeling safer or would you be free and safe to do some boondocking if you found reasonable parking spots?
I think we have boondocked a lot in Mexico as well. So certainly, you know, you always have to make sure you know the area that you're in and make sure it's an area that's relatively safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it is, we've definitely done a lot of boondocking and have never had an issue with it. Especially if you're using iOverlander, there'll be tons of, you know, experience logged from people before who will say how they found it. So, you know, if you've had a lot of people camping there and no one's had an issue, I think you can feel relatively confident. I think one of the reasons we do stay in paid campgrounds in Mexico a bit more is because, especially if we're visiting a city, you know, often, and, you know, when we say campground, we use that pretty loosely. So sometimes it'll be someone who offers camping in the, you know, in the parking lot of their restaurant. And so sometimes if you're visiting a city, it's just easier to be camping, you know, in that campground. It's somewhat of a secure parking and you're right in the city. So you can, you know, walk out for a few days and sightsee that way. And there's even some campgrounds like in the city of San Cristobal it's literally in the city. And it's a secure campground with all the services. So I think we do a mix, but I think part of the reason we stay in campgrounds more in Mexico is convenience when we're in places where maybe there's not a lot of easy boondocking. And then just, yeah, sometimes it's nice to have some extra services, and because it's not expensive, we'll take advantage of that. But certainly there's lots of opportunities for safe boondocking as well.
Well, the other thing that some of the informal campgrounds are so low service is that it almost feels like you're boondocking.
Yeah.
Like we've been on beaches that were technically campgrounds. We're the only person on the entire beach, and it's like, this is like, you know, you're only paying, I don't know, $5 for the night, but you know that, you know, somebody's there, and you know that you just didn't, you know, drive onto somebody's property unaware that you're on somebody's property, right? So effectively, it does give you some certainty about the area. Somebody has control over the area, They'll tell you, you know, local information. So there's a lot of advantages because it's so low cost, and a lot of these places are so infrequently used, especially the places we go. It does kind of feel like you're boondocking.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, it wouldn't be about the money in my case. It would be more about finding a beautiful spot on the water to camp. So
Right.
we got another question from Burkitts. Could you just briefly comment, and maybe this is a whole entire session on its own, but could you comment on the differences between Guatemala and Mexico in terms of RVing?
Yes, so maybe I'll start and
Sure.
then I would say as you go south through Mexico, especially if you're staying away from the coastal areas, which tend to be touristy, there's definitely tends to be less support as you go down, especially if you're in the middle for RVs and vans. So it's kind of, you know, once you get to the Guatemalan border, there's not a lot of people traveling in RVs and vans anymore. And when you get into Guatemala, I would say there definitely are some campgrounds and some light services, but Guatemala definitely has less services for vans and RVs. That being said, if you are traveling to the places where people tend to like to go, Antigua, Lake Atitlan, there are some places to camp, and one of our favorite places to camp in Guatemala is Lake Atitlan, and there's an amazing campground there that's I think $10 US a night that is like a secure field. There's apartments and campsites, and you're looking right at the volcano and the lake. So we've spent a lot of time there, and it's amazing. Another thing I would mention that took us by surprise is that Guatemala is on the whole more expensive for tourists than Mexico. Things like going to the market to get fruits and vegetables, the transportation, a lot of stuff is actually a bit more expensive. Still cheap compared to Canada and the US, but I'd say significantly more expensive than Mexico. And that's something we didn't expect. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Marc?
Yeah. And the road conditions can be worse.
Yeah.
You know, there's been in some areas earthquake damage, and they are not quick to fix things in Guatemala. And, you know, there's been a few places. I remember one intersection was basically, you know, and I don't know if it was an earthquake, but all of the asphalt had eventually been broken away. And it's just like you're 4x4ing through the intersection with everybody else. And it was like, are you kidding me? It was like, oh my God. And there's a few places where like you have to take turns passing on this regional highway because the left half fell into the gully from an earthquake, and they haven't fixed it yet. So everybody, it might have probably been there for a year, I don't know, but everybody knows and everybody drives around it, and they have cones and everything, but you have to be a little more aware. Everything's a little more rough there.
The roads are worse. Getting around is definitely a little bit more intimidating, I would say. Crossing the border is a little bit more complicated, although again, totally doable as long as you do your research.
The border, the dog with the border crossing is more complicated.
Pets are more complicated bringing them across. But still, I mean, we've spent a lot of time in Guatemala and absolutely love it. So if it's the place you're interested in going, absolutely worth it. But it is a place I think you need to do a little bit more research.
Yeah. Mexico is a good way to start.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when you feel comfortable with that, then you do another border crossing and so on.
We've been to Lake Atitlan area doing mission work through Rotary, and my wife's a retired dentist, so we have been there with medical dental missions, and it's an absolutely beautiful area. And I echo Natalie and Marc's comments about that area. If you're going to Guatemala, for sure you want to spend time there. So we got another question about the availability of good cell phone service and Wi-Fi. And do you recommend any specific carriers for the best service?
Yeah, I would say in terms of just cell phone capability, Baja is terrible for cell phones and Wi-Fi generally, and we definitely experienced that this last year when we were down there.
Stuck in the desert.
Yeah, but the rest of Mexico, I would say and Guatemala as well, has very good, it's very dense populations. So actually the cell signals tend to be really good. And actually we feel that we have better Wi-Fi in Mexico and Guatemala than we do here at home. And actually we're doing this presentation from my father's apartment because our our internet is so bad at home. So it's definitely something that is, I don't think, an issue for people traveling down there. We typically buy a SIM card for each country when we're traveling through, and then use our cell phone as a hotspot if we're using our computers. So I think we've used AT&T and Telcel when we've been in Mexico, and I think in Guatemala we were using a company called Tigo, so that's Tigo. And you can just buy a SIM card and, you know, put a certain amount of data on it, and then you just keep refreshing it as you run out of data. It is not the cheapest, no, I would say.
And it's always a bit of a struggle. Every time we go there, we have to figure out which, like, everything's always changing. So it's like, which is the better deal, which is the better carrier. So depending on where you are, you have to figure those things out. So
yeah, I think Baja is Telcel, and the rest of Mexico works fairly well on AT&T from what we've learned. But I would be very interested. I know Samson was on and a presentation about the Starlink would really interest us as a potential for travel. So that's something we're considering looking into at some point.
There is a YouTube channel, and I'll try and see if I can connect with them. They specialize in mobile phone and internet usage for boaters and RVers. So hopefully between them and Samson, maybe we can get a session on that going down the road in the future. Also, we won't impose on you too soon, but I see a couple comments about might we do a session on composting toilets. So maybe put that on your to-do list if you don't mind. We did have another question. I think this doesn't pertain to RVing in Mexico. It's a general travel question, which is carrying local peso money and where you do the exchange. And I think a lot of us are familiar with that, but do you have any quick comments on that?
I would say the main thing that we've done in the past is we always carry over about a week's, so we leave from Canada with about a week's worth of pesos. If we're going to Guatemala, often always we bring quetzales, which is the currency there, just so that when we first get into the country, we have some money and we don't need to worry about trying to do money exchanges at the border, which can always be a little bit more sketchy. And then once we're there, we just use our regular bank cards from home and we use the bank machine. So like Santander is a bank that we actually really like in Mexico and use a lot. There is the fees for taking out money are pretty expensive. Like it's sort of a typical ATM fee, but it depends on the bank, what they charge. So you do lose on that, but we find we prefer to use cash everywhere and save our credit cards for only like maybe at a big hotel or something if we were staying at a hotel for some reason. But other than that, we really just go with cash and we just take it out from the local bank machines.
Yeah, and the fees eventually add up quite a bit over time, but we just look at that as the cost of travel and being more secure with our finances. And you know, it's some of them we've paid. Do you remember?
We paid as much as $6 US to take out money.
Yeah, so you're best to try and take out the maximum the little machine's going to give you, because you know $6 US is on the expensive side. So you don't want to take $20 out and get charged $6 US for that. So you take the most you can, and that'll be good for us for the week or so.
Yeah.
And we repeat as we go along, and that's worked quite well for us. And we don't have to worry. You know, the whole country loves to work on cash, and that's, you know, their preference, and that is safer for us from a perspective of credit card fraud and that kind of thing. So
okay, so we've got want to take a pause here and see if we've got anyone who would come on and ask their question in person. I got a couple more on the chat here, but is there someone waiting with a question that would like to come on? We'll give you a second to think about that. The next one in the chat, folks, is kind of a two-pronged one. They're asking about the comfort of biking around Mexico for errands or exercise. And the second part of that is, would it make sense, or would it be feasible to take an e-bike?
You know, we've had that discussion. We've never brought our bikes, but we've thought about it. We would like to do it at some point. It would be very useful, and there's a lot of opportunity to like do some mountain biking. We were thinking if we were going to do it, we would probably get a rather lower end or a good old mountain bike that if it got lost somehow through theft, that it wouldn't be the end of the world. But certainly I wouldn't bring my $1,500 mountain bike with us to Mexico. We would purposely buy a beater that is very reliable, that is less likely to get walked away. But yeah, it would be really nice. On the east side, we don't have a lot of experience with e-bikes. We still pedal a lot. But I would say it's the same deal. I think the only difference is, they may be a little heavier, but as long as your rack can hold it, that's probably fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in Mexico do get around on bike as well. So I would say, as long as you're in a safe place, getting around on a bike is very safe, and it would be super convenient actually for running errands. The reason we haven't brought one is because with the dog, we feel like we wouldn't use it a lot. But it's definitely something we're considering bringing on our next trip, basically for exactly that reason. The only other concern I think with a bike is that some dogs like to chase bikes, and some areas do have a lot of sort of street community dogs that are sitting around and potentially eager to chase a bike. That would be my only concern. But I think if you're staying in mostly the sort of the more touristy areas, you wouldn't run into that as a problem.
Yeah.
So
the other benefit is that renting a bike in Mexico is usually a tourist thing. So they come with tourist costs. And they're relatively expensive. The local Mexicans are not renting bicycles, it's the tourists. So they're higher end bikes, more expensive. And certainly you don't want to do that on a regular basis because it's gonna cost a lot. So bringing your own beater bike, if you're going to be using it a lot, would be very beneficial.
Okay, we've got a question regarding to lower biodiesel percentage that sprinters require. I think I already know the answer to that. I don't know if you've got any input on use of diesel, and I know the Mexican diesel has got a lot higher sulfur content, but any comments on that?
Yeah, we've heard a lot of discussion about that, but because we don't have a diesel, we really don't know how much of a problem that is. Certainly we see diesel vehicles all throughout Mexico, and certainly there's, they've found a way to deal with that. But, I really can't, I don't have the experience to be able to comment on that.
I do think I was involved with a friend who had diesel, and there's a certain year where they switched to the newer diesel fuel requirements, and the recommendations that he had after researching it was to stay with an older unit pre-diesel, the new diesel requirements if you're going to be going to Mexico.
Yeah, certainly in Mexico, the whole industry runs on diesel trucks, and same with Guatemala. So diesel's available, but all those vehicles are old school kind of things, and they're belching a lot of carbon. You can see it. So it's available, but if you're talking about the requirements of a new diesel vehicle, that's certainly something to consider.
Yep. So you answered this next question already in your session on the transmission repair, but very quickly, maybe you could just comment. Eric's asking about if you need RV parts. I know some are available there, but if you had to have something shipped in with Amazon, any experience with the delivery aspect of that you might want to share tips on?
Generally, we have never shipped anything through Amazon. We've had a few instances where we were kind of getting desperate for like some fittings and things like that. And the problem is that you just don't know how long it's going to take something to get shipped from the US through the border to some place that you're currently at. Particularly in a road trek, you tend to move around a lot. So unless you're going to be somewhere for a long time, that's the only kind of situation where that can work. And we've heard it, been done before. But we've also heard of people who have had, had serious breakdowns, and they did not want to take a chance, and they flew back to the US, get their parts, flew back, And, they just did not want to have something caught at the border for a month or that kind of thing. So it depends on what you're trying to deliver. Certainly you can get stuff. Certainly if you're going to be in one place for a long time and it's something that's not critical, then certainly it's worth attempting. But we've never done it, but we've seen people who have.
Okay, and if anybody does have a challenge in border crossing, I have a couple Rotary friends who are customs brokers in Mexico on the Mexican side that can help you expedite those needs if you need to. It might cost you a pizza to the border guard, but it's a doable thing. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're trying to figure out where to have it sent, I'm sure that's a challenge. Have you ever been to Guadalajara area or Ajijic or any of those regions?
We've been through Guadalajara, but really didn't spend any time there. We sort of just crossed through on our first crossing. We came down sort of to central Mexico, across and up towards Mazatlan. But no, I know Lake Chapala is an area around there that's very popular, and we haven't really spent any time. Where the southwest and the northwest, I'd say, are two bubbles that we're kind of missing from our experience map.
Yeah, there's some like really high-end places like Copper Canyon and some other places in the south,
the
northwest.
Yeah.
There's a lot of apparently a lot of gringo retirees in that region.
Yeah.
That's why I asked, and rents are fairly cheap. And the other spot, I've spent some time in Mazatlan and Progreso area doing volunteer missionary work with Rotary and medical missions. And Progreso is absolutely a wonderful area, which is just kind of northwest of Cancun or north of Mazatlan. A lot of beautiful beaches. Again, there seems to be a lot of gringos there that go for the winter, but just an amazing area to boondock along through there. And I've driven down through there. It's very safe. I've never driven in my road trek, but I feel comfortable driving in Mexico. When I get a vehicle supplied by a friend with a Mexican plate, then you're not a target. But Progreso is a nice area that I enjoy.
Yeah, I think one of our favorite areas is probably sort of that north central Mexico, where the big colonial cities and towns are all clustered kind of just above Mexico City. Not as good for boondocking or beaches, but excellent if you like colonial architecture and yeah, cool. Like if you like sort of cool mountain weather, colonial architecture, that kind of thing, it's fantastic for that. And certainly Baja, if you like beach boondocking, it's just you can just boondock the entire way down both coastlines and back. Like that's a great spot.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned is that you're talking about gringos, and if you're traveling in Mexico, it's easy. There's a lot of easy places wherever there is a lot of expats living. Certainly, services are more likely to be in English. There's more likely to be, foods and products that you're more used to because expat groupings tend to bring that in. So effectively, if you're looking for something that you can't find, or you want to be in a more easy place where it's more understandable, then an expat community is great, because most people speak English, and you're seeing the same kind of stuff in a grocery store because they're importing it for you. Might be more expensive, but if you're looking for a bit more homey stuff, you've been out Mexicoed in some parts and you want a bit more home feel, you can get to an expat community, and there's a lot of them too.
So if you were going to Mexico for the first time, did not have a specific destination in mind, would you recommend somebody target the Baja Peninsula and do that, or would you recommend that they go down the mainland side?
I think it probably depends on what you enjoy seeing. Baja certainly is a lot of beach and desert, not so much with a lot of towns and cities. But just in terms of sort of easing in, absolutely Baja, I think, is sort of the easiest way. A lot of people come down the Baja sort of dip their toes in. You can take a ferry from the south of Baja over to Mazatlan on the mainland. And so a lot of people who are doing longer trips actually go down the Baja, across the ferry, and then into the mainland. And Baja's an excellent sort of easy introduction to Mexico, I think, for people who are maybe a bit nervous or don't speak a lot of Spanish. We did it the opposite. The first time we went straight down into the middle of northern Mexico, which was very intimidating, I'd say, on our first trip. And we actually circled back up through the Baja and realized that it probably would have been better done the other way around. But
yeah, in the Baja also, you don't have to import your vehicle if you're going to stay in the Baja. So there's that just makes the border crossing so much easier.
That's a good
point.
Yeah, and I think similar to the Baja Peninsula, if you go along the Arizona-Mexican border, they have the 21-mile region. So if you're driving into Mexico from Arizona, you don't need to import your vehicle, but there's a second border point at the 21-mile marker, Mark, where you do have to go through that paperwork you mentioned. And then there's an area over what they call it Rocky Point, which is maybe 3 hours south of Yuma. And that's in Mexico, a very beautiful area. But again, it's in the region, like you mentioned, Baja. So that's where I've seen a lot of RVs down in that area.
And certainly if you're looking for more full service RV parks, that's also very easy to find in the Baja as well. So lots of boondocking, but also lots of RV support there.
Any more questions from the audience or the participants? Please do come on and ask your question. We've gone through all the ones on the chat box. One final one, maybe people might be interested in the advantages, the pros or cons of going in a group. From time to time on the Facebook forums, we've talked about forming a group of a few road trekkers going together. Safety in numbers, I suppose, is the motivating factor for that. But I know there are companies who provide paid group tours with RVing. Any thoughts on whether that's worthwhile, or you just jump in your rig and go?
Well, that's a good question, and it kind of depends on the individual. We met a large group of what they would call a caravan, and it was organized by a company, and we had a good opportunity to chat them up. And it's like, where are you going, and what are you doing, and how much does it cost? And they were all fascinated that we were traveling by ourselves. It's like, what? You're traveling by yourself? You're not in a caravan? Aren't you afraid? It's like, no, we've done it quite a few times. But I think the fear factor plays a big role in that. And certainly if that's what it takes to get you into Mexico, then there's nothing wrong with that. Eventually you'll become more comfortable, and a lot of them said, oh, one day I want to do it like you guys. And it's like, yeah, like this, you totally can do it. Like we've known 80-year-olds doing it. It's like, from a perspective of the fear factor, it's mostly, a myth. You have to be careful, like anywhere else you would travel, but it's mostly a myth. You are not going to die, So the other aspect to that is the cost. They were on a 70-day tour, which is quite a big tour. They were maybe 19 or 20 vehicles. They had a lead guy and a back end guy. And they were all together all the time. And they would go to the big RV camps, like RV parks, more formal ones where they had dumping stations. So they traveled that route, and they didn't deviate because they couldn't deviate. They had to stay on that route. And effectively, I think the company paid for like museums and a whole bunch of things. So they got some perks with it, but I think it cost them $5,000 a vehicle, if I recall, for that service. So it's not cheap.
Yeah, I think if it's really an organized one, they're very expensive and they're very structured. So if you don't like structure, it definitely wouldn't be for you. I think a more informal one where it's just like a group of, a handful of like road treks, for example. If it's a group of people who are wanting to go over and maybe just wanting, a little bit of safety in numbers, wanting a little bit of extra support, as long as everyone's schedules line up, then I'd say that would potentially be a sort of a more comfortable way to cross the border, especially the first time. And, that would be free if you're just meeting up with fellow road trekkers, right? So I think that could be an interesting.
But it is tricky, right?
Option,
Because
yeah.
everybody has different, you know, interests in how fast you want to travel and where you want to go. So the more people you add to a caravan, the more likely everybody's going to end up not doing exactly what they want. So you have to take that, and that's why, you know, if we were ever to do it, we, you know, and we've traveled with, you know, another RV once, just because we met them and we thought they were cool and they thought we were cool, and we traveled together for a few weeks, and that worked out quite fine. But if we were more people and we weren't as like-minded, we could see that as being very limiting. So, you know, certainly a smaller group of more like-minded people who have already thought about where they want to go and how they want to do it, you know, you get all that lined up, and that would work out quite well. But I would say the bigger it gets, the more difficult it gets.
And certainly not necessary. Yeah, certainly, you know, if you want to do it on your own, you can. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, and a good hybrid version of that is to have 4 to 6 people who have similar rigs.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, someone on the front end figuring out which road to take, someone on the back end who might be a handyman or a mechanic. So if someone breaks down along the way, he'll come along and rescue you. And maybe you have certain predetermined camping spots. And if someone wants to wander off on their own for a day or two, then they can catch up to you the night after tomorrow at the determined camping spot. So you can make it flexible in a smaller group or stay with the group. And and if they want to go to the museum, then let them go on their own. And you know, you meet up at night for your campfire, maybe a potluck meal at a prescribed spot. But what you do in the middle of the day, if you want to wander off, just tell somebody that you're doing that, so they're not looking for you until you know, it's dark at the campground. So sounds like an interesting concept. We should start talking about that on the Road Trek Facebook forums, and meet somewhere in Texas or Arizona on a prescribed day and go for it.
Oh yeah, it would be fun. It's there's pros and cons on both sides, but you know, if that's what it takes to get you over the border, I think that's great.
Yeah, and if somebody spent, say you could make it a 1-week trip together, and then at the end of that week, if you want to turn around and go back on your own, you can. If you want to take the ferry across to the mainland, you can. If some of you want to continue for the second week, that's an option, I suppose. So yeah, it could be free and loose. And I think I'm kind of like you folks. I'm a bit of a nomad. I like going down the 2-lane roads, and often I'll set my GPS to avoid you know, the interstate highways, because we like going down the smaller roads into every nook and cranny that we can. So I'm just going to check here. Gray water, where do you dump it? I don't think the gray water or black water answer is any different unless you have a different answer.
Well, actually, because we have a composting toilet, we don't deal with black water, but we do have gray water. And so it's kind of managed in campgrounds. We tend to often use a collapsible sink. So where, you know, once we finish dishes and whatever, we just throw it into the grass, and that makes it
or
easy.
the communal sink, depending on. So I think what we've started doing now more in Mexico is we will only use the gray tank if we really need to. So if, you know, if we're camped in a parking lot somewhere or something like that, we'll use the gray tank. But essentially we have a little collapsible sink. And so if we're anywhere where we can either dump it into like a communal sink, or if it's, you know, we're in the forest and we can just sort of, you know, chuck it out the door type thing, then we'll do that. And that way it takes forever for the gray tank to fill up. And, you know, the next time we're at a campground with a dumping facility, we'll dump the gray tank there, because we were finding it a bit stressful at one point, you know, filling up the gray tank and then searching for a place to dump it. So that this has sort of eased that stress.
Oh, that's a very good tip. I think we can use that regardless of whether in Mexico or the US or Canada. If you're on the road and you're having trouble finding places to dump, that collapsible sink pan is a good idea.
Yeah, we use it more and more. It's kind of one of those things like, why didn't we do that before?
It's been a game changer actually, because I feel like that was almost like a constant stress of like, oh my gosh, the gray tank's getting full. Where are we going to dump it? And the other thing we've done in Mexico, they tend to be fairly open with, is even if you're passing a campground, you don't want to camp there, but you need to dump your gray, they'll often let you pay a small fee to just dump your tank and keep going. And people do that in the US, I think in Canada sometimes too. So that's also an option that we've used in Baja.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay, one last call, folks, for questions. Anybody want to come on and ask the final question of the day?
I just want to say thank you so much. I'm planning to cross the border around January. And so Doug, Natalie, Marc, thank you so much. This has been really great.
Great.
Awesome.
Maybe we'll see you.
Yeah,
we're crossing probably early January.
Well, mid-January, maybe.
Maybe early mid-January. So
yeah, I'll be crossing coming from Austin, and I want to kind of make my way over towards Baja, but I'm going to go slow. I'm looking to take it easy and relax. I don't want to spend the whole time driving.
That's the best
like
way.
Us too. Yeah.
That's why we're slow Sally, right?
Yeah.
So where do you folks usually cross in when you go, Marc and Natalie?
We usually cross in Texas. There's a crossing called Columbia. It's right near the main Laredo, Nuevo Laredo crossing, but it's a little bit to the west, I think. Yeah, a little bit to the west. And it is the best, in our opinion, border crossing. It's mostly trucks that go through there.
It's quiet.
So quiet. There's never anyone around. The border officials there have always been really good.
We've been there alone at some point. So it's like compared to the other one where it's mayhem basically. Everything
happens in one building there. So it's not like this kind of like Easter egg hunt around town to find the different buildings that you need to go to get things signed off. Everything happens in one building. So that's where we try to cross when we're crossing down into the mainland, and it's the best one we found. There's lots we haven't done, so I'm sure there's other good ones. Tijuana is where we crossed coming back out of the Baja, and I would never cross that one by choice. But you know, we were with the tow truck and towing our van across at that point, driving. So we didn't get to choose. But yeah, that's not one I would choose. But I think Tecate is one in the Baja, just maybe an hour and a half east of Tijuana. That's a good one to cross as well that we've been through.
And how do you spell the name of that crossing near Laredo? I used to truck livestock into Mexico, and we always went through Laredo. But how do you spell that town? Columbia.
So Columbia. I think.
Columbia.
Yeah, like Columbia. Yeah.
Okay, so there's your answer, Jane. Yes, we will be posting this the video of this presentation within the next few days once I get it downloaded, edited, uploaded, and all that rigmarole. Okay, well, thank you so much. Marc and Natalie, I think you've added Mexico to some bucket lists here today, and assured everyone that we're not all going to get mugged or killed when we go to Mexico. And it's just absolutely amazing to watch your journeys and your blogs. And just a reminder to everyone that they do have a Slow Sally and Crew blog of their travels, where you can follow them every day or two. They're giving reports and photos of what they're doing and where they're going. And I know I certainly enjoy that. And I spent, as I've mentioned, a lot of time in Mexico over the years, but never took my road trek into Mexico. So that's going to be now on our list. And I'm sure many others as well. So we'll see you on the highways, and maybe eventually we'll get a group traveling together in an informal way as we've talked. So we will see you on the road.
All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
hope to see you in Mexico. Bye.